In the twilight of January 29, 1943, USS Waller, a Fletcher-class destroyer, cut through the choppy waters north of Rennell Island. Just 2 months after her shakedown cruise, the ship and her green crew found themselves thrust into the heart of the Pacific War. As part of Rear Admiral Robert C. Giffen's Task Force 18, Waller's mission was critical: protect the force's cruisers and intercept Japanese ships attempting to reinforce Guadalcanal. The destroyer's sleek hull, stretching 376 feet, bristled with weaponry. 5 5-inch guns stood ready, alongside 10 torpedo tubes and numerous 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Yet, for all her firepower, Waller's true mettle remained untested. As darkness fell, tension mounted on the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Lawrence H. Frost, Waller's commanding officer, kept a watchful eye on the radar screen. The crew's training had prepared them for this moment, but the reality of impending combat loomed large. The stillness shattered as radar contacts bloomed across the screen, a swarm of Japanese aircraft bearing down on the task force. The shrill sound of the general quarters alarm pierced the air. Sailors scrambled through narrow passageways, hearts pounding as they raced to their stations. Gunners gripped their weapons, eyes straining against the darkness. In the engine room, the 60,000 horsepower turbines roared to life, pushing Waller to her full speed of 38 knots. The sky erupted in a daunting light show. Tracers streaked upward from Waller's guns, answering the distant flashes of Japanese bombs and torpedoes. Each thunderous report from the 5-inch guns sent shockwaves through the ship, a brutal reminder of the thin steel barrier between the crew and the perilous waters below. Japanese aircraft swarmed around the task force, their torpedoes leaving foaming trails in the moonlit water. The fate of Task Force 18, and perhaps the entire Guadalcanal campaign, hung in the balance, and the young crew of USS Waller faced the ultimate test. Their baptism by fire had only just begun. USS Waller, a Fletcher-class destroyer, was engineered for speed, agility, and firepower. As one of nearly 200 sister ships, she was at the core of the United States Navy's destroyer force. With her streamlined design and high maneuverability, Waller bristled with powerful dual-purpose 5-inch guns, torpedo tubes, and an array of anti-aircraft weapons, ready to rain destruction on enemies at sea and in the air. This naval powerhouse arrived at a critical moment, as the United States was embroiled in its most challenging naval conflict to date, the Pacific War. Waller slid into the water on August 15, 1942, christened by the widow of the distinguished U.S. Marine Corps officer for whom the ship was named. After her shakedown cruise, Waller left the New York Navy Yard on November 31st, bound for the Pacific. Led by Lieutenant Commander Lawrence H. Frost, her crew of 300 officers and enlisted men navigated the Panama Canal and Pearl Harbor before dropping anchor at Afate on January 21, 1943. This speck of land in Vanuatu pulsed with Allied activity and was quickly becoming the staging ground for the brutal island-hopping campaign ahead. January 29, 1943, found USS Waller screening Rear Admiral Robert C. Giffen's Task Force 18 north of Rennell Island. As twilight descended, radar screens flickered to life, registering unidentified aircraft. At 6:50 p.m., Lieutenant Commander Joji Higai led 32 Mitsubishi G4M torpedo bombers, known as Bettys, in a daring assault. One Betty zeroed in on Waller, dropping a torpedo and strafing both the destroyer and nearby USS Wichita. Waller's gunners responded with a heavy barrage, their new proximity Mark 32 shell fuses proving devastatingly effective. The enemy aircraft plummeted into the ocean near USS Chicago in a fiery ball. At 7:31 p.m., Higai led a second wave from the east. Japanese scout planes dropped parachute flares, bathing Task Force 18 in eerie yellow-white light. Waller's gunners once again sprang into action, their proximity fuses wreaking havoc among the attackers. Another Betty careened into the ocean astern of Waller. Despite the fierce defense, 2 torpedoes found their mark on Chicago, leaving her immobilized. as Louisville moved in to take the stricken cruiser under tow. Waller and her fellow ships formed a defensive line against further assaults. The following day, Japanese aircraft returned. At 4:24 p.m., torpedoes churned toward the slowly moving ships. Waller's guns roared in defiance, but 4 torpedoes struck Chicago in quick succession. As the cruiser began to sink, Waller assisted in rescuing survivors from the water. Throughout the battle, Waller's crew demonstrated remarkable skill and bravery. Her anti-aircraft batteries, along with those of her fellow ships, brought down 12 enemy aircraft. However, the loss of Chicago was a sobering reminder of the fierce resistance the Japanese continued to mount, even as the tide of war in the Pacific began to turn. In early March 1943, the soon-to-be legendary Captain Arleigh 31-knot Burke took command of the destroyer Waller, making her his flagship. On the night of March 5th, Burke led a daring raid on Japanese airfields at Villa, on New Georgia's southern coast. His force included the destroyers Waller, Conway, and Coney, along with the cruisers Montpelier, Cleveland, and Denver. The destroyers in the task force were responsible for silencing any hostile shore batteries that could interfere with the cruiser's main bombardment. That evening, as Waller entered Kula Gulf shortly after midnight, her radar detected 2 ships at the eastern entrance to Blackett Strait. These vessels, later identified as Murasame and Minaguno, were steaming out at high speed, oblivious to the American presence. At about 1 a.m., flagship Waller initiated the attack, launching a powerful 5-tube spread of torpedoes from 3.5 miles out. Only seconds later, her guns roared to life, catching the Japanese destroyers completely off guard. While the surprised enemy ships returned fire, their sudden and unplanned shots went wide. Within 6 minutes of the initial attack, a violent and loud explosion tore Murasame in 2, and while Minaguno stubbornly clung to life for a few moments, she too would succumb to the assault from Waller and her American counterparts. After dealing with the enemy threat, the virtually unscathed American force pressed on to their primary objective. For 16 intense minutes, they pounded the Villa airfields before withdrawing, leaving dozens of fires burning in their wake. The precision and effectiveness of Waller and her fellow task force members drew high praise from Admiral Chester W. Nimitz. Impressed by their performance, he later remarked, quote, "The operation had all the precision of a well-rehearsed exercise by veteran ships, which these were not." Waller remained a relentless force in the Solomon Islands. As the Japanese desperately tried to resupply their isolated garrisons on islands like Bella Lavella, Arundel, and Kolombangara, they relied on destroyers as makeshift transports in what became known as the Tokyo Express raids. These dangerous supply runs often led to fierce and brutal night battles against American cruisers and destroyers. In return, the Americans gave one hell of a fight to the Empire, subjecting their islands to relentless harassment from the sea and air, day and night. In early July, she was caught in a brutal clash with 10 Japanese destroyers. The engagement resulted in 2 enemy ships sunk, but the Americans lost the cruiser Helena to long-lance torpedoes. While attempting to rescue survivors, Waller detected a submarine, initiating a 3-hour hunt and deploying depth charges. Although no confirmed victory was reported, the task group commander lauded Waller's persistent pursuit, believing the submarine was likely destroyed. Throughout the summer of 1943, Waller maintained her support of operations in the Solomons, escorting troop and supply convoys. During one mission with a task group bound for New Georgia, a search plane reported enemy ships near Kolombangara Island. Waller swiftly altered course and soon spotted 3 unidentified vessels off the jungle coast, unaware that these were actually American patrol torpedo boats, small, fast, and agile vessels designed to perform hit-and-run attacks against larger enemy ships using torpedoes. This group had erroneously strayed from their patrol area. Believing they had locked onto a powerful trio of targets, Waller opened fire, mistakenly believing she had scored a hit. In the middle of the skirmish, the startled PT boats hastily launched torpedoes and then retreated south. Waller also resumed her duties, and her crew was convinced they had successfully struck a Japanese destroyer. Only later did the crew learn of their dangerous near miss with friendly fire. As dawn broke on August 15th, Waller stood guard over the Vella Lavella landings. Her radar suddenly crackled to life, revealing 10 Japanese dive bombers a mere 38 miles out. The destroyer's guns roared in response, her anti-aircraft barrage claiming 2 enemy planes. And while 8 torpedo planes soon swooped in low, Waller's 5-inch guns failed to find their mark. Disaster struck only 2 days later when Waller collided with another destroyer during evasive maneuvers. Despite the heavy damage, her crew worked tirelessly to return her to action. By fall, she was back at Vella Lavella, where over 2 nights she decimated 10 enemy landing barges, part of a more significant American victory that sank 46 enemy craft. It was almost as if she'd never been hurt. November found Waller screening convoys near Bougainville. On the 18th, as Empress Augusta Bay glowed under a fierce anti-aircraft barrage, Waller's guns helped down a Betty bomber. In the battle's aftermath, she rescued 8 Japanese aviators from the unforgiving sea. As 1944 dawned, Waller pressed ever closer to the Japanese mainland. In early February, she bombarded enemy positions on Buka Island and Choiseul Bay, and 2 weeks later, she joined a task force to strike Japanese defenses at Cape St. George during the Green Island invasion, though foul weather obscured the raid's true impact. It seemed like there was no stopping for the Navy's greatest destroyers, and the island-hopping Waller ship was the greatest example. After a well-earned rest, Waller set sail for Saipan, escorting TG-5118, an elite expeditionary force tasked with supporting the Marianas occupation. On June 18th, Waller and fellow destroyer Pringle entered Magician Bay to bombard Japanese positions. Their mission was to identify enemy tanks, and was cut short when shore guns suddenly opened fire, forcing a hasty retreat under a thick smokescreen. The rest of the summer saw Waller supporting the Guam invasion, providing crucial fire support until the island's capture. She then returned stateside for a much-needed refit, lasting through early fall 1944. The powerful destroyer rejoined the 7th Fleet in the Philippines that November. Waller immediately faced a kamikaze raid. Her guns blazed, downing one plane and assisting with another. That same night, the triumphant returning vessel led a daring 4-ship sweep into Ormoc Bay, pounding Japanese positions and sinking the submarine I-46, following a tense cat-and-mouse chase. As the final year of the war dawned, a still hard-at-work Waller found herself in Lingayen Gulf, fending off kamikaze boats and weathering intense enemy raids. While escorting a convoy toward Honshu for what was to be the final invasion, joyous news reached the crew. Japan had accepted unconditional surrender. Yet, the sea held one last challenge. That fall, Waller struck a Japanese mine, injuring 25 crew members in her worst incident of the war. After repairs, she finally steamed home to America in December, and her long journey was at last complete. After her return to American soil, Waller was placed out of commission, remaining in reserve at Charleston until the outbreak of the Korean War. Converted to an escort destroyer, Waller then proudly became the flagship of Escort Destroyer Squadron 2 on January 28, 1951. That May, she sailed into the turbulent waters near Wonsan Harbor, where for 10 relentless days, as part of Task Force 95, she unleashed a storm of firepower, hurling an impressive 1,700 rounds of 5-inch shells at various targets. In subsequent summers, she escorted 7th Fleet units off Okinawa before returning to her blockade duties near Wonsan. From 1951 to late 1956, Waller continued to hone her skills, this time in anti-submarine warfare exercises along the East Coast, and performing multiple deployments to the Mediterranean and Caribbean over the next 4 years. September 1968. Conflict in Vietnam saw Waller departing Norfolk, and once again in hostile waters, she assumed patrol duties on the gun line off Chi Non in South Vietnam, where her 5-inch guns roared to life once more, inflicting heavy damage on Viet Cong bunkers and storage areas. Moving south to Phan Thiet, Waller continued to destroy numerous enemy structures and disrupt supply lines. That fall, she fired nearly 2,500 rounds, earning high praise from naval top brass. Waller then performed 109 days straight of escort duties for naval carriers before the battle-hardened destroyer began her final journey home in March 1969. That spring, Waller was decommissioned and later authorized for disposal as a target on February 2, 1970. Thus ended the long and illustrious career of USS Waller, a destroyer that had earned 12 battle stars for her service in World War II, along with 2 each for her actions in Korea and Vietnam.